Welcome back to The Place of Places, a chapter-by-chapter analysis of William Saroyan's 1972 memoir, Places Where I've Done Time. Today we look at Chapter 4, The Opera Club, 24 Avenue de l'Opéra, Paris, 1949. The chapter begins with Saroyan walking around Paris in 1969. Leaving his apartment on the 5th floor of 74 Rue Taitbout, he visits Place d'Estienne d'Orval and Trinité Church, where a hearse sat, either ready to be used or unloaded. He goes into the church and sees a priest and altar boy in prayer, and then takes us on a tour of his neighborhood, the 9th arrondissement and surrounding areas, making note of the Gare Saint-Lazare, a very famous railway station in poem, song, story, and drama. This station was a painting subject for Manet, Monet, and others. Émile Zola included it in his 1890 novel La Bêche Humaine. Hemingway included it in The Sun Also Rises in 1926. Guillaume Apollinaire writes of it in his poem Zone in 1913. Saroyan moved to Paris in 1958, in part to avoid income taxes, though he moved between France and America often. In the late 60s, he bought his house in Fresno and alternated living in Fresno and Paris. The 9th arrondissement is also known as the Opera District because it is home to the Paris Opera, or Opera Garnier. Redeveloped for upper-class Parisians in the late 1800s, the district was a magnet for artists and high-end retail shoppers. It has been home to many artists, including Edgar Degas, Alexandre Dumas, Toulouse-Lautrec, Auguste and Jean Renoir, Django Reinhardt, George Sand, Chopin, Monet, Manet, and frequented by Van Gogh, Liszt, and Berlioz. Saroyan's childhood literary hero, Guy de Maupassant, wrote favorably about it in his novel Bel Ami, and himself spent time at Café de la Paix, as did Victor Hugo. The Folies Bergère, a cabaret music hall in the district, was the bar famously painted by Manet. In short, it was certainly the type of place that a writer might end up, even if the district had lost much of its artistic luster by the 1960s. The neighborhood had become a working-class one by the time Saroyan moved there, but Saroyan's larger-than-life presence had a joie de vivre that fit perfectly here. William recalls a police officer directing him to the Opera Club in 1949, a private casino that he would return to on subsequent visits to Paris. He describes the Opera Club as being on the 3rd floor above a sign on the building that read Bata. What was Bata? He doesn't know, but it apparently sticks out in his memory. It's hard to say from this temporal distance, but it may have been a shoe store. There was a Czechoslovakian shoemaker who had built a multinational corporation with ties to the Nazis in occupied Czechoslovakia. After World War II, the company began rebuilding in Western countries. Maybe this was the same Bata. At the Opera Club, he lost money at baccarat. As we touched on in the analysis of Chapter 1, Saroyan had a gambling addiction that took shape in many different forms. He wrote extensively about this part of his personality in Here Comes, There Goes, You Know Who. Saroyan mentions 2 important journeys to Paris before he moved there, and they are mentioned in this chapter. The first was in 1935, when he was touring Europe after his story collection, The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, had found success. Most of his tales from that trip focus on visiting Soviet Russia. That experience shows up later in Places Where I've Done Time, when he visits Moscow. But in Paris, he spent time at the Café de la Paix, which was established in 1862 and declared a French historic site in 1975. he remarks that it was populated with the same people in 1969 as in 1935, bohemian artists and other independent types. The second significant journey was this gambling episode in 1949. He and his wife Carol had separated. He had just learned that her ancestry was Jewish, and he felt she had lied to him by withholding that information. It was a particularly low point for him, and he mostly spent his time in Paris losing money. In Portugal, Spain, and Italy, he also gambled, finding it hard to write as he thought about his estranged family in New York. In Letters from 74 Rue Tabu, published in 1969, he writes, "I was 41 years old at the time, and in a bad way, having just left my wife, small son, and smaller daughter, for reasons that were grave enough to make my leaving imperative. I was in a state of spiritual shock. I missed something. I could say it was my wife, my son, and my daughter, but I'm afraid it was something else. I missed the truth." In Paris, he had stayed at the Scribe Hotel, or Le Scribe, because the name means to write, and he felt his best chance of getting myself back together again was to write. In 1935, he had gone into the hotel to look at it, and in 1945, he spent time there because it was a popular hangout for foreign correspondents, photographers, and writers. He gambled with them too, playing poker. In 1949, he had wanted to write a novel, but came away with the short story, The Assyrian, which became the title story for his collection, The Assyrian and Other Stories, published in 1950. On this trip in 1949, he met up with his cousin, Chesley Saroyan, the son of Uncle Aram. Chesley and his wife were living in Paris at the time. He was 13 years Saroyan's junior, and like another cousin, Archie Manassian, considered William a mentor. Saroyan was 41 and Chesley was 28, an aspiring writer. In Letters from 74 Rue Tabu, Saroyan elaborates on this meeting with Chesley. There he describes Chesley as pleadingly asking Saroyan if his manuscript was any good and if he could be a real writer. William is noncommittal, but encouraging. Chesley moved on to other professions and died in a car accident in 1965 at the age of 44. As Saroyan notices the hearse at Trinité in 1969, it's possible that he was also thinking of his old friend Chesley and hanging out with him in this neighborhood. Themes of death and the afterlife are showing up again in this book. Let's throw this on the Saroyan map and move on.